There is a heavy ignorance about the Mario Kart series, so people will look at this series briefly and tell you that it's one of the best casual game series of all time, and they'd be correct and reasonable to make that claim. Mario Kart is a system-selling game. It's one of the titles everybody can pick up and have a good time playing, largely in part due to the comeback mechanics every game provides. The recent game in the series is no exception to this rule. With 2 item slots in Deluxe now, you're never really truly out of a race until it's over, and compared to many games in the series, Deluxe is very friendly to new players. This all makes for a game that is enjoyable for everybody, as anybody can win. For some people, beating Grand Prix mode is enough for the Mario Kart experience, but while that content ends, time trials and online play provide endless content. It's something that a multiplayer game, I guess, can get away with that single player games can't. So, at this point, if you want to keep playing, you typically do so because you want to get better at the game, not because you want to beat the game. So, after a while, many players face the following question. Is it worth it to continue to improve at a game where seemingly anybody can win? And I think the answer varies by person. Some people say the game isn't meant to be played seriously at all because of the heavy influence of RNG. For those of you who don't know what RNG stands for, it's random number generation, and in this context, it can be reduced to luck. Why play a game seriously if luck can cause you to lose? So, to others, people think that luck should be eliminated and suggest that playing itemless, much like Smash Bros, is the best way to make a skill-based experience playing Mario Kart. It's a driving game, so speed should be rewarded, right? The reason why there's so much ignorance about the type of game that Mario Kart can be is because these questions don't have simple answers, and when something is hard to explain, then it only makes sense that many aren't going to understand it. That being said, these questions do have answers, and I'd like to answer them to the best of my ability in a timely, easy to understand manner. Now, I personally believe that improving at Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, or really any game in the series, is worth your time if you enjoy the series at any level whatsoever. So, I'm going to make a 3-part YouTube series to try to sell people on the game and why it's not just a casual player's dream, but an extremely underappreciated competitive game. So, the truth is, it's very hard to understand the appeal until you really experience it firsthand. And it may sound insane at first, but try to keep an open mind. Though it's a disadvantage that the game needs explaining like this to appeal to many on-the-fence fans, who may or may not see the game as worth their time, the advantage is, for us, that this is a franchise that will always have on-the-fence fans. The game is a top seller on every system it's on, so I think this is why these videos are necessary, because the game has unlimited reach. It's just on us, the players, to get people to want to take their game to the next level. So anyways, before I really formally get started on part 1, I'll be releasing these episodes weekly, so stay tuned for that. If you want notifications, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell. My videos are usually released at random times, but you can expect lots of MK discussion on this channel that you may not find really anywhere else. So anyways, for this series, the subjects will be as follows. Number 1, how items supplement Mario Kart and build a better game. We talk about game formats and items in this video. This is the video that we're doing that in, so just wait a few seconds and we'll get started. Part 2, how to minimize the impact of RNG while rewarding multiple different skills. In this video, we're going to talk about probability and a way in the form of team matches to improve the overall game. And episode 3 is the problems that the game faces at a lower level and how to fix these issues. And for a lot of this third video, we'll be talking about free-for-all tournaments, so just solo activity stuff. But let's finally get started on the whole items dispute. Before we talk about items themselves, we need to talk about what it means to be skilled at Mario Kart. So, when you think of what matters in this game, the first thought is going to be speed, which makes sense given it's a kart racer, and yeah, being fast is certainly a relevant skill. There's a pretty common misconception though that simply being fast is equivalent to skill at this game though. And while it's certainly a luxury to have good racing lines, it may not matter if you have no consistency, for instance, even in an itemless game. So, in an itemless game, who would be the best player in the world? Now, I'd like to show a very simplistic example that isn't going to really be representative of any real scenario or player, but it should describe clearly how there can be value to consistency. So, take a look at this graphic. Both players play a track, and both have a high end time and a low end time. Player A has the faster ceiling as well as the faster floor than player B, but because player A is only able to achieve a ceiling about half the time, it's actually a safer bet to assume that player B will finish a race quicker, due to him being more consistent, at obtaining his peak performance. Now, there are other factors in play, of course, because rarely will a player actually hit his ceiling or floor. There aren't just two outcomes as well, there's infinite, but the consistency ideas still apply here. You could also argue that the faster player may put more pressure on the slower player due to catching up more quickly, but as a general example, it shows that there's more to the game than just being quick. So while time trialing may evaluate one's maximum potential on a track, and could definitely give somebody an edge, it may not be entirely indicative of how good they are at the track overall. Now, the cool thing about the competitive game is that unlike time trials, you get only one shot to deliver in a single race. So who wins is not going to be obvious ahead of time. And this is why we compete to begin with. So I'm going to leave a question in the description for anybody who wants to think about this stuff more, so you can check that out there. So, ideally, you want to strive to be a player with a high ceiling that you can frequently reach, which would be mastering both good lines and consistency. But is this all we should want to test in a player? I talked about Smash earlier, a competitive game that benefits greatly from turning items off, so let's talk about what makes Smash different from Mario Kart. So, in Smash, the objective of the game is to knock out an opponent before you're defeated yourself. In Mario Kart, the goal is completely different. Your goal is to finish a race quicker than your opponent. So what this means is that you may never even have to interact with an opponent a single time in order to achieve your goal, unlike Smash, where an opponent may, adapt multiple times in a single game to trick you up. And this is problematic for Mario Kart for a variety of reasons. Interactivity is a key of most competitive games, and Mario Kart doesn't inherently have this. Itemless Smash does. So it's impossible to win every exchange in an interactive game because, stuff like mind games exist. Maybe option A beats option B, but what if your opponent does option C instead of option B? You'd have to adapt and choose a different move. Now, because it's impossible to win every exchange in an interactive competitive game, we actually have a reason to compete, because a game that can be solved loses its worth in playing. And I think the reason competitive tic-tac-toe will never really take off is because it's a solved game. Whoever goes first can force a tie at worst. So, time trialing for sure has its value to a competitive Mario Kart player because speed is useful, and lots of times being significantly faster will be enough to take care of a weaker player on its own. But an activity like time trialing is comparable to a three throw in basketball. It's an activity done by a single person without outside influences, and certainly a useful skill to have for an otherwise interactive game. The thing about racing lines and three throws are that the path to success in these areas always remains the same. For Mario Kart, this means that racing lines can be learned and regurgitated over and over again without much thought at all. Lines are simply memorized and not an interactive skill. But luckily for Mario Kart, the game having items actually gives the game an opportunity to have an interactive element to it. Suddenly, you can have an effect on your opponents outside of bumping into them, which causes both you and them to play differently. Suddenly, things like mind games can actually exist. Now, as we know, playing Mario Kart with items introduces RNG to the game, but they also add a ton of other skills in the process that quite frankly makes it all worth it in my opinion. The most important thing is that items force decision making into the game, which is an element almost impossible to master. The example earlier of 3 options is now something that exists in the game, because maybe dropping a bomb beats a player driving directly behind you with a red shell, but what if they do, the option C, and you drop the bomb, but they go wide instead and actually throw the red shell at you because they don't get hit by the bomb. These kind of interactions are things to consider at all times, and many times there's more complicated examples than this. Knowing what to do in challenging scenarios can actually be something that is way more difficult than pulling off a challenging shortcut. Knowing when to go out of your racing line for a double box or to collect coins is also important to consider. Sometimes sacrificing temporary speed in order to do something else may be faster in the end, whether that be going out of your way for coins or even braking to avoid a blue shell. Decision making alone almost justifies the addition of items into a metagame, but there's even more factors to consider. Being accurate at throwing items in a way that won't mess yourself up is an underrated skill. Some of the best players in the game have the uncanny ability to snipe players miles ahead with bananas, for instance. Just last month, one of my friends found out that you can absolutely demolish people roughly 3 to 4 seconds behind you on the final glider of Wario Stadium if you ricochet a bomb off a pole at the end of the track. Now, these kind of plays are a very real thing that are an afterthought to many people, but it's something we know about because we introduced items to our game. Items also can put you in terrible situations at times. We all know that the best time trialers are great at executing normal racing lines, but life isn't always full of sunny days. Being able to improvise is really an extremely underrated skill to have. Now, having the ability to steer yourself out of a bad situation is something that isn't just tested by ordinary driving. Item play makes being able to navigate the middle of the pack and spots in the back a necessary skill as well. Oftentimes, the best players aren't just the ones who are excellent at front running, but are the ones who are able to best avoid disaster situations and maybe pull a 6th place result out of a race that was looking really grim going into a lap 3. Because no player is ever going to make the correct choice 100% of the time, the game has a rather unreachable skill ceiling, and you're going to find that even the best players make wrong decisions all the time. But what sets these players apart from the rest of the pack is that they're able to make the correct decision more often than others. Though in most formats, scoring 180 points would be a perfect match, a player can average 100 points versus elite competition and quite literally be one of, if not the best player in the world. Having a game that's impossible to win at every time also leads to having a purpose for everybody to play, because there's always something to strive for. Risk and reward is an idea that's synonymous with competitive Mario Kart, because sometimes a play is worth going for given circumstances, and sometimes it's not worth going for at other times. Only experience will be able to help you answer these kinds of questions. So to answer the title of the video, items build a better game by creating one that evaluates a plethora of different skills. But we have to talk about the elephant in the room still, that being the randomness involved. I want to start by offering an idea that seems contradictory at first. Less variability does not equate to being more skill-oriented. Less variability simply means that results are just more consistent, and in a metagame without items, I do believe that the results of our tournaments would have less variability, and it may be possible that the best player would win more too. But to call the best player in this scenario more skilled than the current best player who is able to balance good driving and consistency with excellent decision making, item play, and the ability to succeed in multiple different ways would be false. The players in a meta with items are simply tested in many more areas. One of the big issues with many new Mario Kart players is that because randomness is involved in the meta, they like to use it as a scapegoat to all their problems. And people don't like taking responsibility for their shortcomings, which I think is a pretty natural human reaction. Sometimes, people will lose to players that they see as worse than them, and it will make them upset because maybe that player simply got better luck. But here's the reality, and while this is definitely possible, a lot of times you just got outplayed. And I promise you that upsets have happened in every game or sport that has ever existed, even the ones without RNG. Just look at March Madness every year. Basketball does not have RNG, and sometimes an inferior opponent just has a good game and straight up outplays players who are ordinarily better than them. But what's sad about Mario Kart is that some players will delude themselves into thinking that their reason for losing every time is randomness because it simply exists in the game. Sometimes you do get bad RNG, but sometimes you can also just get outplayed, and players don't like to admit it. The good news is that after playing the series forever now, I can promise you that the game is balanced enough to be competitively viable. Sometimes you just have to consider other factors, and lots of times you'll improve quickly. What I recommend doing is analyzing your gameplay and considering what you could have done differently to avoid a bad race. And as a veteran player, I still find tons of mistakes because the game throws so many wild scenarios at you. And if I can find faults in my play, I can assure you that every lower level player who is convinced that the game is rigged against them has plenty of holes in their play that they simply aren't addressing. Improvement is very possible and satisfying, you just have to look for ways to do it. I highly recommend trying to hit the grind for the game though if you enjoy it. I don't just say this about every game either. One other kart racer I thoroughly enjoyed on the Switch was Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, and after lots of time on that game, I can actually confirm that it's not a good competitive game at all. And what's crazy to hear is that many people actually deem this game to be the way more skill-oriented game, but that can be further from the truth in my opinion. The game was built to be exactly like Mario Kart, but has two very distinctive differences. The first is that the driving is way more complex, which is where it gets its great reputation. The driving is way harder than in MK, and driving well and exploiting the game's advanced techniques takes a ton of more skill. Where this game completely falls is that it doesn't transition into being a good interactive game, because the item system is so incredibly imbalanced in comparison. When you get hit by an item in Mario Kart, you lose a consistent amount of time. The issue in this game is that if an item hits you, and oftentimes you can't control it, you could lose up to 20 seconds by just not being able to exploit the game's techniques, whereas other players can pass you when that happens. Where Crash ends your race over something that may or may not have been avoidable, Mario Kart often offers you an entirely new way to win. And being able to win from the front, back, and the middle of the pack are all incredibly valuable skills created by this game's item system. And it makes for a rewarding experience that is still easy to pick up for new players. At the end of the day, it amuses me that people like to act like Crash is the Dark Souls of kart racers when they're really not woke at all. I think because Mario Kart is so mainstream, people often try to dethrone it, when there's really just nothing out there that's better in the genre, I think. I still recommend CTR for those who are interested in it, by the way. It's an incredibly satisfying speed game. I just wouldn't expect a super deep, interactive, competitive game out of it. Anyways, my goal of this video isn't to tell you that the best player always wins in Mario Kart, but instead to set up a discourse for the next two videos on how to truly take advantage of what the game offers. You know, the balance of driving ability, decision making, etc. It's obvious that it's not won by the best player every race, but this absolutely doesn't mean that there's no skill involved. It just means that you have to organize your tournaments in a way that rewards a player deserving of winning, and not one that just got lucky. And there are many ways to do that, and that's because luck tends to even out when randomness is involved. Now, a disclaimer, just because you get unlucky doesn't mean you're due for good luck. It's just that obtaining any average luck pulls you closer to the average, whether or not you're currently above or below it. Because you're generally expected to get average luck, this will happen enough. And the harsh truth is that if you don't get pulled towards the average luck area over time, it's because of you as a player. But again, this can be taken as good news, because that means that there's improvement out there to be had, and the improvement will be worth your time. The next video will elaborate on this idea of luck and how to set up good tournaments. But if you want to hear more about this idea now though, I highly recommend watching Extra Credits video on the same subject, titled Randomness and Esports. I'll link it in the description. The video discusses how to balance games with randomness involved, and will serve as a good preview for what's to come in my future videos. It discusses poker in depth, and that's a well-recognized competitive game with randomness involved. For instance, sometimes some player is just going to obtain a royal flush, and there's nothing you can do about it. But if you want to really test skill, you can start by doing things such as making players play more hands. But anyway, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in